Well, hello. Hey guys. First off, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the story. If you missed one of my previous videos, I'm kind of going from vlogging to telling stories about, weird stuff. Mysteries, legends, myths, all that kind of fun stuff. But for the vlog lovers, I'm going to be throwing in a vlog from time to time. And because I like you guys, I will have playlists for your viewing pleasure. Secondly, even though my background is Ukraine, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation on a lot of these words, and I apologize, and I mean no disrespect. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite mysteries, the Dyatlov Pass incident. There are some sensitive topics that I'm going to discuss and a few pictures that are kind of on the borderline. So I just want to let you know that viewer discretion is advised. In January of 1959, a group of 10 students from Ural Polytechnic Institute, UPI, went on a hiking expedition in the northern Ural Mountains. 10 days into their trip, an unknown incident sent the hikers fleeing from their tents into the darkness of the night and into the freezing cold. When the group returned to Fail home at the date of the estimated time, their families obviously grew very concerned and they requested a search and rescue team. Now back then there was no official search and rescue, but this team was made up of several students and government officials. Their frozen bodies were eventually found miles away from their destroyed tent. When they were found, some had very serious injuries and some were practically naked. Now, what happened up there in the mountains that 9 very experienced hikers ended up dying the way they did? After the autopsies and the investigation, government officials stated in their final report that they had died as a result of an unknown compelling force. What does that even mean? The group traveled with journals to write in and they had cameras to take pictures. So parts of the story we are able to piece together with those things that were found, but then nothing. Decades later, no one knows what actually happened. Igor was 23 years old and he was the group's leader. He was studying radio engineering at UPI and he was just going into his 5th year. He was lean and strong and was very well known for his ability to rebuild things and his technical know-how. He had joined the hiking group in his first year of studies and he quickly became a very seasoned hiker. He had endured many grueling hikes, including many winter hikes, which took him into temperatures of 30 below. UPI graded these hikes, giving them a numerical value, grade 1 being the easiest, up to grade 3 being the most difficult. It was stated that Igor had completed several grade 3 hikes, and as the years went on, Igor started to lead the hikes, and many people respected and trusted him in this role. Of the entire group, Igor was the most experienced. In November of 1958, he went to the UPI hiking club and requested permission to lead a grade 3 winter hike. His request was approved, but it did have a stipulation that the administration would approve all hikers that were going, just to make sure they were capable of a grade 3 hike. Word got out fast and many current students as well as past students applied. At the end of December, Igor had his group and it was set in motion to do their hike during their winter break from mid-January to mid-February. Zina was also a student at UPI and she was majoring in radio engineering. This 22-year-old was also a very experienced hiker. Zina was considered to be a natural leader, didn't slack off, and was always helping out. During a previous hiking trip, she was actually bitten by a viper. Despite the amount of pain she was in, she refused to let that get her down. She survived that bite and moved on, and she was still outgoing and energetic the entire time. Besides going on many hikes with Igor, her hiking career also consisted of 6 expeditions, 4 of them being at a grade 2 level. It was stated that after this current expedition that she would advance to grade 3 level, and she was really excited about that. Lydia, she was 20 years old, and she was actually the youngest in the entire group. She was at her 3rd year at UPI studying engineering and economics. She was considered strong and was capable of withstanding a lot of pain. On a previous hiking trip, she was shot in the leg after someone had mishandled a rifle. And although she was carried out of the rugged terrain, her attitude remained positive throughout the entire time. She quickly healed and got right back into hiking. She loved photography, and she was also in the UPI's ice dancing club. She had a fun, lighthearted spirit and could find the good even in bad situations. Yuri Y. He was 22 years old and in his 4th year at UPI studying engineering and economics. And even though Yuri suffered from sciatica, which is a severe pain going from your lower back down through your legs, he was also a very avid hiker, and he had also completed many grade 3 hikes. Originally, he was supposed to be the 10th member of the group, but his sciatica flared up and he wasn't able to continue. Instead, he stayed at a nearby town to wait for them, and then they would all return home together. Staying behind ultimately saved his life, but he was extremely traumatized over the years on what happened to his friends, and he never forgot it. He passed away in 2013. Yuri D, he was 21 years old and a radio engineering student. He had once dated Zena, and although the relationship ended, it was on good terms, and it never ever impacted any of the hikes that they were both on. They had remained friends. There was not a lot of information about him, except that he was pretty well known for an incident that happened during a previous hiking trip. It turns out that he had run after a giant bear with a hammer in order to scare the bear off. He was clearly not afraid. Yuri K. was a graduate from UPI with a degree in civil engineering. He was 23 years old. He had actually recently been promoted to a supervisor at his job at the plant and would start his new position on February 21st, right after the expedition. Yuri K. was also a very experienced hiker and had completed a few grade 3 hikes. Yuri K. played the mandolin and would often bring it with him on most of the hikes. He loved to play for the group. Alexander was 24 years old and he was studying physics and technology at UPI. He had previously been in a hiking club in Moscow and had actually completed several difficult hikes, including one to the polar Urals. When he started school at UPI, it was just a given that he joined the hiking group there. He was known to be a very private person and often did not share his journal entries. And although he was a private person, he was very well liked and he was considered a natural leader. He collected and smoked antique pipes. Rustam was the son of some very prominent university professors. This 23-year-old had also graduated with a degree in medical engineering. He worked at the same plant with Yuri K. He was an excellent athlete, and among completing many grade 3 hikes, he also enjoyed long-distance running. Like Yuri K., Rustam also played the mandolin, and he would also bring it on hikes, and he loved to play for the group. Nikolay was 23 years old, and he too had graduated from UPI with a degree in civil engineering. Nikolay had a rough childhood. His father was accused of being active in the Revolutionary Party and convicted of crimes against the state. Nikolay had actually been born in a prison camp. Despite all this, he was a very happy, intelligent, and reliable young man. He was serious and well-read, and he was always looking for the good and the humor in any situation. Like all others, he was an avid hiker, and he had also completed several grade 3 hikes over the years. Simon was 37 years old and the oldest in the group. He had actually been a soldier in World War II and had earned 4 combat awards. After the war, Simon went back to school and after a few setbacks ended up graduating in 1951 at the Minsk Institute of Physical Education. He had been working as a hiking instructor at another school and was actually in line for a position as an instructor at UPI. Going on this hike with Igor would greatly improve his credentials as he would have completed a grade 3 hike. He was the only one out of the group that wasn't friends with everybody else. He was just an outsider, but the UPI administration had requested that Simon join the group so he could be considered for this position. The group really wasn't happy about this decision at the beginning, as when you are doing a winter hike, grade 3 level, you need to have some trust and bond with the others in case things go bad. But it didn't take long, and Simon eventually warmed up to the others, and they became a very solid group. January 23rd. The group of 10 heads out to start their journey. At about 9 p.m. at night, they take the train to the city of Saraf. January 24th. The group arrives at Saraf in the morning, where Yuri K. was detained for soliciting and singing out loud. He was released a few hours later, and then they board the next train. January 25th. The group arrives by train in Ivdel, a central city at the northern end of the province. They spend one night here, then they take the bus to Vizhay. January 26th. From Vizhay, they catch a ride with a truck that takes the group into a logging community called District 41. January 27th. The group hires a driver and sled to take them 24 kilometers to an abandoned mining town called the North 2. January 28th. Yuri Y's sciatica flares up, and knowing he can't make the trip, he goes back to town with the driver and sled. The now group of 9 put on their skis and make their ways into the mountains by following the valley and the river. January 29th. The group makes their way from Lozva to Ospia River on skis. They put up a tent, and it seems that they spent 2 nights here. January 31st. The group tries to go down from the Ospia to Lozva River, now called the Dyatlov Pass, but turns around and goes back to spend the night at the banks of the Ospia River. February 1st. The group makes a storage shed to lighten up their load, and for reasons unknown, probably due to extreme weather, they go 500 meters off their planned route. They hike another 2 kilometers and make camp at the north slope of the Kalot. February 2nd. No more journal entries and no more photos are found. We can assume this is when the incident happened. February 12th to February 14th, the group was expected back in Vizhay. February 21st. Search parties made up of students and government are on their way. February 26th. A rescue team finds the tent, and that opens up an official investigation. February 27th. Bodies of Yuri D., Yuri K., Zina, and Igor are found. March 2nd. The storage shed that the group built was found. March 5th. Body of Rustam was located. An icy bed was found underneath the body. May 5th. The bodies of Lydia, Alexander, Nikolay, and Semyon were found. May 27th. A radiation analysis report comes back showing radiation on the clothing and tissues of Lydia, Alexander, Nikolay, and Simon. May 28th, government officials close the case. When the investigation was closed, part of the official statement given was as follows. Considering the absence of external injuries to the bodies or signs of a fight, the presence of all valuables of the group, and also taking into account the conclusion of the medical examinations for the causes of the death of the hikers, it is concluded that the cause of their demise was overwhelming force, which the hikers were not able to overcome. The tent was the first thing to find. It was discovered on February 26 on the slope of the Ural Mountain. The entrance of the tent was looking south and it was covered in about 15 centimeters of snow. There was certainly not enough snow at the back to block the entrance. On the outside of the tent, the searchers found a set of skis, an ice pack, and Igor's jacket. Also outside, beside the tent, was Igor's flashlight. The odd thing to note about this was that it was actually on top of 10 centimeters of snow. One of the searchers picked it up, turned it on, and it worked. From the searcher's witness testimony, he stated, "We couldn't understand why the snow under the flashlight was 10 centimeters thick when there wasn't any snow on the flashlight itself." There were long cuts in the canvas, and it was later proved that these cuts came from the inside going out. It almost seemed like the hikers were trying to cut their way out of the tent instead of using the entrance. Now, there is some controversy as to whether when the tent was found that the door to it was opened or unopened. But even so, if they were all in a rush to get out, you would think that unbuttoning an entrance would still be faster than cutting through thick tent canvas. Inside the tent were all their belongings and everything seemed to be in place. All their food supplies, items for cooking, axes, flashlights, everything was found. And it almost looked as if they were just sitting down to dinner or in the middle of dinner when this all occurred. There was cured meat, crackers, there was a cup of cocoa. None of these items were damaged. They weren't scattered about, they weren't crushed, they weren't burnt, nothing. A lot of the group's outdoor clothing was in the tent as well. And remember, we're in the middle of winter in freezing cold weather. Winter jackets, ski pants, winter hats, and 6 pairs of the hikers' winter boots were still inside the tent, and they were just stored to the side as they would be. By all accounts, it seems like the group was having fun that night in good spirits because they put together a flyer called the Evening Otorton. It was a newspaper spoof containing funny articles that members of the group wrote up. Now, during the investigation, there was never any picture taken of this actual flyer, but it was later typed out and filed in the investigation. And put a pin on this, as we're going to be discussing this later. Because none of the search team actually expected to find the entire group dead, no one made an attempt to record the footprints outside the tent in a proper fashion. What they did photograph and record is the following. Most of the hikers left the tent wearing no footwear, and the footprints indicate that they left in a calm, orderly fashion. There was no signs in the snow of struggle, of panic, or running. No photos were taken of this, but witness testimony states that they could actually see footprints going down into the valley in a single file, as if they were just all casually walking down. On February 27th, 1.5 kilometers away from the tent, searchers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri D. and Yuri K. And it looked like these 2 young men had actually tried to climb a tree, maybe looking for something, or were they hiding from something or someone? There were branches broken from the trunk of the tree that went up 5 meters, 16 feet. And there were also loose branches from the tree scattered on the ground below. When Yuri D was found, he was wearing a sleeveless cotton undershirt, short-sleeved checkered shirt, shorts and swimming trunks. His cotton underpants were ripped on the front, causing a large hole. He was wearing different sets of wool socks, and the sock on his left foot was burnt. He had on no shoes. Just on a side note, livor mortis is a pooling of the blood in the body due to gravity and lack of blood circulation. It begins about 2 hours after death, and it becomes permanent after 8 hours. Livor mortis spots were located on the back of his neck, the back of his torso, and the extremities. Now, the spots are not consistent with how they found the body. Yuri D was found face down, which means the body was moved sometime after the livor mortis had set in. On the body, they found particles of moss and pine needles. They were found in the hair. The right side of the hair was burned. One of his ears, nose, and lips were covered in blood. The right cheek was covered with a gray foam, and gray liquid was coming from his open mouth. Now, the most apparent cause of this is pulmonary edema. The upper lip was swollen, and inside the right earlobe were patches of this brown reddish color. The right inner arm had 2 cuts. The right armpit had a bruise, and there was bruising on the upper right forearm. Small cuts and swelling were on the right hand, and the fingers were a dark purple, which for the most part indicates frostbite. The left shoulder and elbow had abrasions on them, small abrasions, and there were bruises on the shins of both of his legs. Now, Yuri K was wearing an undershirt, a long sleeve checkered shirt, swimming pants, long underpants, and one sock that was torn on his left foot and nothing on his right. He was also wearing no shoes. Yuri K was found next to Yuri D. Now, on the body, he had bruises on his forehead. The tip of his nose was missing, and there was no trace of blood. And sometimes this suggests that it was bitten off post-mortem, probably by animals. A portion of his skin from the right hand was found in his mouth. The right hand was swollen, and the fingers are a brownish purplish color. The palm on the right hand is discolored, and there is a wound at the base by the thumb. There are several cuts on his fingers, and there were also abrasions on the left wrist and the back of the hand. The left hand is also very swollen. There were bruises on his left buttock, and there were 3 lesions with straight edges on his left thigh. 3 more wounds were found on his left hip, and also edema was found on the left leg and the foot. There were abrasions on his right shin. Now, side notes on these 2 that were found. The foamy gray foam that was found on Yuri D's right cheek could be caused by either someone or something pressing on his chest cavity, or it could also have been caused from falling from a tree. Now, the portion of skin found in Yuri K's mouth could be explained that he was either biting himself to keep himself awake, or was he trying to stifle a scream? It is also speculated that their clothes were removed by their friends after their death. And this would explain why some of the clothes were taken off and used by other members of the group. It would also explain why the bodies were moved and laid side by side, almost in a respectful manner. Now, Igor was found the same day about 300 meters away from the cedar tree. He was wearing an unbuttoned sleeveless fur vest, a blue sweater, long sleeve cotton vest, cotton pants with ski pants over top, 1 cotton sock on his left foot, and 1 wool sock on his right foot. He wasn't wearing shoes either. He was wearing a watch on his wrist that stopped at 5:31. Igor was found face up with his head facing in the direction of the tent. You could see that his hands were clenched into fists and folded on his chest. They found small abrasions on his forehead, his upper eyelids, above his eyebrows, and both of his cheeks. There was dry blood on his lips, and both his knees were bruised. Both ankles had brownish red abrasions, and then there was a small incision just right above his right ankle. There were many scratches on his lower right arm, and his right hand, the knuckles were bruised. This is common, like when you make a fist and you're hitting somebody, you're punching someone. That's where all the bruises were found. There were wounds on all his fingers of his left hand. There were no internal injuries that were found. Now, Zena was found about 630 meters away from the cedar tree, and she was wearing 2 hats, a long-sleeved undershirt, 2 sweaters, and a checkered shirt, and 1 cuff was actually torn off. The sweaters were inside out, but this didn't cause any alarm because this is actually pretty common for mountaineers to do. Cotton sport pants, trousers, and ski pants were on her bottom. She was wearing 3 pairs of socks, but herself, she was also wearing no shoes. Zena was found face down, her body curled up in a fetal position. Now, one thing to note about this is she was actually the only one found in this kind of position. And this is indicative of someone, how they would be if they were freezing to death. They would be curled up into a little ball. So the fact that she was the only one positioned that way brought in a lot of questions. On her body, there were dark red abrasions on the right side of her forehead. There was a pale gray area above the right eyebrow. There were abrasions above both upper eyelids, scratches on the bridge and the tip of her nose. There were numerous abrasions on her cheeks, and there were numerous abrasions on the back of both of her hands and joints. Her fingers did indicate that they were frostbit as well. There was 1 long red bruise on the right side of her torso, and it looked as if something like a baton was used. Rustam was found 480 meters from the cedar tree, and his body was found on March 5th. He was wearing a long sleeve undershirt, another long sleeve shirt and sweater. He had on 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and only 1 felt boot that was on his right foot. Nothing on his left foot. He was also wearing a watch that stopped at 8:45. When they found Rustam, he was covered in 50 centimeters of snow, face down in what they call an ice bed. And basically what this means is that the body fell when it was still relatively warm, and there was a noticeable heat exchange that went into the surrounding area. Like Igor and Zena, his head was actually facing the direction of the tent. On his body, they found hemorrhages on both of the temples, minor abrasions on the forehead. There was a bruise on the right upper eyelid. There was a small amount of blood coming from his nose, and there was swelling and multiple abrasions on both sides of his face. He also had bruised knuckles, and we talked about that earlier. There were bruises on his left arm and his left palm. He had a swollen lip, bruises above the left ankle, and skin was torn from his right forearm. He also had a pretty substantial fracture on the frontal part of the skull, indicative of being hit in the head with a blunt object. Now, side notes on this is the autopsy suggests that Rustam suffered a loss of coordination after the initial blow to his head. When a person falls, even in a confused state, it is usually like the palms first that suffer the most because they're falling forward, and maybe parts of the leg. Injury to the head is less common, especially to the sides of the head. In the case of Rustam's body, we actually see the opposite. His injury pattern is reverse of what we would actually see in injuries suffering from a freezing man in the last minutes of his life. It almost looks as if Rustam fell repeatedly on his face as he was walking down a mountain or something, and every time he fell, he managed to hit the sides of his head. Now, this is really unusual and makes very little sense. It wasn't until May, when the snow started melting, that a Mansi native, Mansis are indigenous people living up in the Ural Mountains, along with his dog, found a bunch of branches that almost looked like they formed a trail. He also found a black pair of sweatpants with the right leg cut off with a knife, and a woman's sweater with the sleeves cut off. The den was found, and it contained the remaining 4 hikers. Now, the den is one of the key issues that is talked about a lot when it comes to this incident. Why? Well, because it clearly shows that at least one of the 4 was thinking clear. They were clear-headed. They knew what to do and what to build in order to try to stay alive and to survive. But nobody knows why this didn't work. The den was about 75 meters, about 245 feet away from the cedar tree, and it was in a ravine that would have protected them from the winds. Building a den is very common with mountaineers to survive freezing cold winters. Now, the searchers began to dig and found cut branches with clothes 3.5 meters down underneath the snow. The bed on the bottom was made up mainly of fir tree branches and 1 birch tree. 20 meters from the den, they actually discovered the remaining 4 bodies. But why were they not in the den? Another thing searchers and officials could never explain is the fact that the branches for the den were clearly cut with a knife, but no knife was ever found in the area. Lydia was the first of the 4 that was found. She was wearing a short sleeve shirt, long sleeve shirt, and 2 sweaters, and one of the sweaters actually belonged to Yuri K. She was wearing 2 pairs of pants, but the outer pair was badly damaged by fire and was also ripped. She was wearing a small hat, 2 pairs of socks, and it looked like she had taken off one of her sweaters and cut it into pieces. She wrapped part of it around her left foot and then left the other half, or dropped it, up in the snow above for reasons unknown. Lydia was found on her knees, face and chest pressed into the rock. She was laying on a natural ledge with water rolling over her. Her mouth was found open. The soft tissue around her eyes were missing. Eyebrows, nose bridge, and the left cheekbone were partially exposed. Damaged tissue was found around the left temple. The eye sockets are empty and the eyeballs were missing. The nose was broken and flat. Soft tissue on the upper lip was missing, and the teeth and upper jaw was exposed. Her tongue was also missing. There were multiple ribs broken on both sides, and she had a massive hemorrhage in the right side of her heart. There were bruises on her left thigh. Side note on her, the stomach contained about 100 grams of dark brown mucosal mass, often misquoted as coagulated blood, but it is actually the lining of the cheeks and the back of the lips inside the mouth. It is stated by some professionals that with the finding of this, it indicates that the heart was beating and the blood was flowing when the tongue was removed. When they found Simone, he was wearing 2 hats and a scarf. He was also wearing a long sleeve shirt and a black sweater, a coat, 2 pairs of pants underneath ski pants. His feet were in a pair of socks and he was in warm leather boots. What is really weird is that he was found with a camera around his neck. There was a pen in one hand and a notepad in the other. It is stated that the notepad actually had nothing written in it, so they just threw it away, and the whereabouts of it is now unknown. His body was together with Alexander's, breast to back, as if they were trying to keep warm. When they found his body, his eyeballs were missing, soft tissue around the eyebrow was missing, and a bone was exposed. There was an open wound on the right side of the skull with his exposed bone. His rib cage was also broken with several broken ribs. Side note, when they investigated the camera, they did realize that it was too damaged to retrieve many of the photos that were on there, but a lot of people ask, if they were running for their lives, why stop and grab a camera? What was so important that he wanted to document? Another thing about the camera is the fact that we don't know where it came from. Yuri Y, the one that actually went back to town because of his sciatica, later stated that the group only had 4 cameras, which during the investigation were all found in the tent, including Simone's regular camera. So whose camera was around his neck? When they found Alexander, he was wearing a sleeveless shirt, a long sleeve shirt. He was wearing 2 sweaters and a ski jacket. But the ski jacket did have a big hole on the left sleeve, and it had burnt edges on the right sleeve and several tears. He was wearing no shoes. His body was found together with Simone, breast to back, as if they were trying to keep warm. They found missing soft tissue around his eyes and eyebrows. His skull bones were exposed. The base of his nose was flattened, and there was an open wound behind his ear. He did have some kind of deformed neck, and there was bleeding in the underlying tissues of his left knee. Overall, the skin had a gray-green-like color with a tinge of purple. Nikolay was wearing a canvas fur hat, a shirt, and a wool sweater. He had a fur jacket on that was made of sheepskin. He had sweatpants and cotton pants underneath ski pants, and he had woolen socks, felt boots, and the winter boots. He was wearing 2 watches, one that stopped at 8:14 and the other one that stopped at 8:39. He was found just like a few inches from Simone and Alexander. He had multiple fractures to the side of his head with it extending to the front. There was a bruise on his upper lip, and there was a hemorrhage on his lower forearm. Side note on these 4 bodies that were found, they did have traces of radiation on their bodies and on their clothing. The radiation on Lydia and Alexander's clothing were the ones that were most substantial. I'm going to insert a very short video here so you can kind of get a better perspective of where everything and where everybody was. I found this video online. The link will be in the description box down below. It's only a couple minutes long. Okay, are you guys still with me? I hope so, because we're not quite done yet. Now, I just covered a lot of information, and I mean, the crazy thing is I didn't even touch on half of it. I just gave you the basics. But we're not done yet. We're going to talk about the theories, and the theories are the things that I think keep this going for as many years as it has. Now, one thing I want to say is that There's a lot of them. Like, we're talking, there's over 100 different theories swirling around the globe. I cannot and will not cover all of them. What I will do is I'm going to discuss the more popular ones. Now, obviously, the avalanche is one of the most popular theories, and this is the one that the government finally ruled as the official cause of death. So let's talk about this for a few seconds. The area that they were in wasn't even prone to avalanches. Khorat is not very tall, and it's certainly not very steep. I think I saw somewhere that it was only at a 30-degree angle. Journal entries from the group state fairly thin snow. The first searchers to the area almost immediately ruled out avalanche because there was no displaced snow, there was no downed trees, there was no debris anywhere. Although the tent in the middle was collapsed, you could clearly see the entrance to the tent, and it was elevated, and just a little bit of snow had gathered on the front there. Another thing to point out about the tent is that none of the supplies inside were crushed. We had talked about that earlier. Everything from crackers to a cup of cocoa, everything, nothing was damaged. There were footprints outside the tent. The footprints suggest that everyone left with ease. Another thing, if an avalanche came and had caused all those injuries like the broken ribs and the skull fractures, it would be highly unlikely that they would have just been able to walk away from the tent. Another thing people question about this theory is the fact that this group of hikers were very experienced. They would have known that running out in the freezing cold, and remember it gets to like -30, -40 there, they would have known that freezing to death would have been way more likely than being killed in a very small avalanche. Also, if you look at the following pictures, number 1 was taken on February 1st, and that was the day of the incident. You can see the hiker's gear that is in a vertical position. Picture number 2 was on February 26th, the day the tent was found. You can clearly see the same piece of gear weeks after. It's at the same height. It also doesn't explain the radiation that was found on their clothing. But this doesn't rule out an avalanche. Now, some experts state that an upper layer of snow could have shifted and rolled over the hikers like a big slab. They could have suddenly been trapped under several feet of snow. This could explain the tent being cut from the inside. And once out of the tent, the hikers may have been worried about a second avalanche, and that would have caused them to retreat down into the valley where they had sustained all the rest of their injuries. Now remember, 2 weeks had gone by since the searchers came. If the snow from the avalanche was soft enough and strong winds had come in, it could have blown all the evidence away that an avalanche had even occurred. Another related theory is that the hikers had actually just heard an avalanche. And they heard it and they panicked and they started to flee. They were found a half a mile away, most of them partially dressed. But you would think if they thought they heard an avalanche, and as they were going down into the valley, when they realized, one of them would have looked back and realized an avalanche wasn't coming, and they would have head back to their tent. So while the avalanche theory can kind of make sense, and it is the official ruling now, there is still a lot of holes with that one. Now, there has also been a lot of speculation about military activities going on in the area up there. I'm not going to cover them all because, once again, there are so many. But one thing to note, though, if the military was involved and it really was some top secret thing going on, we will never know the truth. But a few things I want to point out about this theory that doesn't make sense and that people talk about is that if it was military and they were caught seeing something or doing something, why wouldn't the military just detain them? Or if it was like really seriously hush hush, the military just would have made them disappear. A lot of people, including myself, don't think the military would have gone to such great lengths in order to stage the area like it was found. And not only that, but the way it was found had left so many questions, way too many questions for the military. I mean, decades later, and we are still discussing it. So while we can't rule it out, a lot of it doesn't even make sense. Okay, let's talk about why this one is pretty popular. First off, you remember that handmade flyer that we talked about that was found in the tent? One of the spoof news articles talks about a Yeti living in the mountains. There is also one photo that was retrieved from Nicolet's camera of an unidentified person in the background. Many people think that they had actually captured the Yeti on film. I think this is pretty weak because that picture could have clearly been another hiker just all dressed up in his winter gear, or her winter gear for that matter. The missing tongue. Many Yeti believers are convinced that the Yeti would have ripped the tongue out. The broken rib cages and all the broken ribs, well, only something with great strength could have caused this kind of damage, like the Yeti. To this day, many are still convinced by this theory. One of the earliest theories out there, besides the avalanche, is the idea that the Mansi tribe had actually killed the hikers because they had crossed some kind of sacred ground. Now the mountain was home to the Mansi people, and the fact that a Mansi chum was found not too far from the campsite led many people to believe that the Mansi were involved. A chum is a place of sacrifice, and the purpose of any sacrifice performed by indigenous people was to ask God for protection and to provide food. Since then, this theory has been debunked, but several people still talk about it today. Cue in the X-File theme music. This one is probably one of the most talked about theories. Then in the middle today, people are still talking about it. Let's start by saying that several independent witnesses, including geologists and local Mansi hunters, claim to have seen lights in the sky that looked like glowing orbs. They say that these were glowing and pulsating in the direction of the Kolat on the same day, the early evening of the incident. Now remember that random camera that was on the body of Simone when he was found? Well, despite all the water damage from it sitting in the freezing cold for months, one picture was retrieved. It was the last picture anyone in the group took. It showed something strange. Many people are convinced that Simone grabbed the camera and was trying to take pictures of a UFO in the sky moments before they fled the area. Could it be that a UFO had come for them? People that study UFOs and aliens also state that the aliens could have put the hikers into this trance-like state, and that would explain why they found the footprints heading down into the valley in a very calm single file. It could also possibly explain some of the radiation that was found on the clothing, as well as maybe some of the injuries. It's possible that aliens could cause internal damage without causing external damage. Who knows? Here we dive into the psychological occurrence called paradoxal undressing. This can occur when a person is suffering from hypothermia, yet they feel like they're burning up and overheating. It can cause people to remove their clothes in an attempt to cool down. Extreme effects of hypothermia could lead to hallucination, extreme confusion, and hearing things. Could that be why the hikers took off from their tent? Originally, this idea came into play when they noticed that most of the hikers were half dressed in freezing cold temperatures. Okay, that could make sense, but let's look at some facts here before we can say that this is the cause of it. Some of the hikers were taking clothes from other hikers to wear. There was debris from a fire that they found by the first two hikers, and a snow den was made. All these things indicate that they were thinking clearly and actively looking for a way to stay warm and to survive. It also doesn't explain any of the injuries or the radiation on the clothing. Another related theory is the Kármán vortex. Now this is an ultra low frequency that humans cannot hear, but they can feel. It is said to cause panic, confusion, among some other symptoms. While these psychological theories may be interesting to look at, put a little different perspective on things, a lot of people have a hard time believing that anything like this would affect 9 people all at the same time and all 9 of them react the same way. That is highly unlikely for that to happen. And that's all the theories that I'm going to cover. Like I said, those are the most popular ones, but there are so many. I mean, they talk about experiments gone wrong, wolverines, the hikers being high on mushrooms, gravity fluctuation. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What do I think? Listen, I'm only here to tell the story. Okay, I'm kidding. I've read multiple books. I've watched several videos and documentaries. From the research from this video, I have spent hours going over the journals, translated journals, the autopsy reports, and the witness statements from the searchers. I have concluded, while most of the individual events and the individual injuries can be explained by natural occurrences, it's when you put them all together with 9 experienced hikers that things just don't add up. So bottom line, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on what I think happened, but to be honest, I kind of like the alien theory. I don't know, there's just something about that. We will probably never know what actually happened, but clearly after decades have gone by, people are still talking about it. The one thing I can say is that it is definitely intriguing. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear your theories on what happened up there in the mountains. And if you do comment below and you don't agree with other people, just please remember to be nice. And that's all I have for today's video. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. Lots of love, hope, and prayers from Calgary.